A very good morning to everyone who's logged into this broadcast. My guest this week is Mr. Manish Sonthalia. He's the Executive Director and Chief Investment Officer of the PMS Alternates and the Offshore Business at Motilal Oswal Asset Management. Manish has had a long and distinguished career in the asset management field. In fact, the firm he works for is almost a pioneer of the PMS business for almost the last 15 years. And the way they've grown the business, and Manish has played a very instrumental role in that. Just a quick background on Manish before we get started. Manish is originally from Calcutta. He's done his MBA from the Indian Institute of Social Welfare and Business Management. He's done his CS after that, followed by the Chartered Accountancy. And his school and his early day colleges were also in Calcutta. So, Manish, good to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining in. I hope everyone at home and in office is all safe and sound.
Thanks for your kind words, Rahul. Everything is good. So far, so good. Let's see how things unfold going forward as well. I hope everybody at your home is also and at your company is also healthy and in good health.
All good, Manish. Thank you so much. And thank you for taking time on this Saturday morning to do this. So,
My pleasure.
just want to get started off by, like I was saying, you've been born and brought up in Calcutta. It's obviously another hub of the stock market, as it were, apart from Bombay, Gujarat probably, and Rajasthan being the other major centers. How did your romance or love affair with the stock market start? When did you sort of decide that this is something that you wanted to do?
Yeah, so I was always a science student. So in my class 10 and my class 12, I pursued science as a subject. And then, nobody in my family from my father's side or my mother's side has actually seen engineering as a career. So after I had qualified through Roorkee entrance examination, when I asked my dad that I need to go for counseling to Roorkee, he said, "What are you going to do?" So I told him that I'm going to pursue engineering. My father asked me, "What are you going to do by doing engineering? Are you going to open a garage?" So that was it. And he said, "No, there's no need for you to do engineering. Let's pursue into our field of activity." And my father is a practicing chartered accountant. So I said, "Let's get going. You can get enrolled in BCom." And St. Xavier's College was one of the pioneer colleges in Calcutta as far as commerce is concerned. And I began, pursuing my accountancy degree, so to speak. But I was always fascinated with the market because we used to get the Economic Times paper every day, and my father used to pour over those papers. So obviously, when the paper was all read and I had spare time, I used to go through these papers, and there were everything about stocks and which stocks went up and which stocks went down, and a whole lot of reasoning that was given. And that made me actually wonder, what made stocks go up and down. There was to be some rationale that stocks went up and stocks went down. I think that was the beginning of my interest in stocks and stock market. And, that is the beginning of the journey. And I got engrossed in this subject wholly. And that began the career of my fund management in the stock market.
Interesting. Is it correct, Manish, that you actually got a call somewhere in the middle of 2004 from Mr. Oswal asking you to come to Bombay and start a career with them? If so, how did that happen? How did you react? And how did your interview process go?
Yeah, that's also a very interesting facet. Uh, I work for small boutique firms in Calcutta, particularly on the advisory side. And then I used to manage small corpuses of money, something like 50, 60 crores in those days, for on a discretionary basis. I don't know from where Mr. Oswal got my number or my name or my reference, but I did get a call from him in Bombay, and he said that he was the chairman of Motilal Oswal, and I had seen through advertisements on television, etc., that it was a big company. So just out of curiosity, I just accepted that yes, I would like to come to for an interview in Bombay, and I came to Bombay. And let me tell you, this was an interview process which lasted one full day. I landed in Bombay at around 9 a.m. in the morning, and by the time the interview process got over, it was almost 5:30 in the evening. So, there were a whole lot of people who actually interviewed me, including the chairman, Mr. Oswal, Mr. Ramdev Agarwal, and there were many business heads who also interviewed on their part. So it was a grueling process. A lot of interviews, 6, 7 rounds of interviews before this got over. And then I was told that I would get let know whether I was chosen or not, and that I went back to Calcutta. And after a few days, I got a call to come and join the company in the research side of things.
Did you have an inkling of the investment philosophy that day when you went through the investment interview process? Did you get a sense of what you were getting into? Because obviously the tagline of your firm has evolved over the years, and you've obviously been a big stickler for quality, and it's not been the number of stocks in your portfolio; it's been very concentrated. So, did you get a sense that this is what you were walking into when the interview process itself was on?
No, absolutely not. I didn't know what this whole company's philosophy meant, but I just gave them my peace of mind as to how I understood stocks.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a whole lot of questions surrounding all sorts of companies, whether it was commodities, it was sugar companies, it was steel companies, and then they thought and they asked me as to how I did look at those companies in those days, and obviously I told them the rationale, etc., how I looked at these companies, and they just kept on listening, etc., everything. And later on, when I joined the company, I came to be familiar with their style of thinking. And,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, this whole question, you keep asking questions to yourself, why is it this way? Why is it not the other way? And what makes sense in India's context? How have they made so much of money? So these questions, when you get answered for yourself, then you actually come in sync with what the philosophy the company was trying to preach to the entire world, and they followed it themselves to the T. So yes, in the beginning, I just thought that it was stocks that were low were to be bought, and stocks that went high were to be sold. This was the whole rationale, and it was nothing to do with the type of companies that were perpetual wealth creators, or they have to be endured for life. All of that was not there when I first came for the interview. I must be honest about
Interesting. So, if I'm not mistaken, you got charge of the next $1 trillion fund in 2007, and then we went into the 2008 crisis. Uh, how did you approach that? I mean, it was obviously a flagship fund of the time, something that you were looking to build. Can you talk us through the memories of those days and when you took over and the subsequent challenges that ensued through the GFC?
it. So the journey of the portfolio management actually began for me from the year 2003-4. Because I was advising Mr. Ramdev Agarwal, who himself was a fund manager at that point in time, managing the value strategy. That was the first product that we had, and he himself was managing it. Obviously, he required somebody to do wholeheartedly dedicated research for that fund. So, advising him on companies and my rationale, etc. Most of them were rejected, some were accepted and bought into the portfolio, etc. And then in 2007, this flagship product of ours, the next $1 trillion opportunity, got launched on 5th of December 2007. And we knew what happened in Jan 2008. Probably it was 11th or 21st of Jan 2008. The global financial crisis hit us. So to begin with, we had an initial corpus of around 100 crores. In the financial crisis, this 100 crores first went to 42 crores. So we had actually lost within a month 62% of the entire corpus that we had gathered just a month ago. But the process and the philosophy that we have inculcated, that I had inculcated for myself from the company, was the way to think about those businesses. And we actually stuck to those businesses, making no changes whatsoever, even as the markets were actually tanking. And the only thing that we did was that we questioned our assumptions even more conservatively at that point. And we were advising clients that, this all should also pass, and, clients who can top up at this given point in time would be making a whole lot of difference in their long-term set of returns. Some of them followed, some didn't, some pulled out money, and the people who actually took out money still cribbed to the day that you actually lost money for me in the next $1 trillion. The guys who
Mm-hmm.
actually held on or had patience to hold on to the portfolio or did top up, from March 2009 for the next 10 years, the portfolio actually compounded at a CAGR of 30% plus. So, when your fundamentals are right, your questioning is right, the type of companies that you buy, a growth style of companies, and this is one important aspect that I've learned in this company, is that in India only the growth style of investing works. For the simple matter that two-thirds of businesses in India don't even earn cost of capital. And if these businesses don't even earn cost of capital, they are bound to trade at low valuations and low prices to earning multiples. And the balance sheet side approach to valuing companies is actually flawed unless you buy into something which is extremely deep value. Only the earning style of management of money, the growth aspect, since India is a growth economy, and we had bought a whole lot of growth companies which were going through challenging times, but they had significant competitive advantages. We just stuck on to them, and then it was one way on the upside till about the next 7, 8, 10 years, when we actually saw these returns come through for this portfolio. Churn in the portfolio was hardly anything. It was just about 10 to 15%. It's only that we got our earnings numbers right quarter by quarter, year by year, which actually worked for the investors in the
Interesting. So, Manish, before I get into your style of investing and how that has panned out, you obviously are a part of a firm that runs an asset management business as well as a portfolio management services business. How is it different when you're a fund manager in PMS vis-a-vis a mutual fund? Are the expectations of returns very similar to the investors who are putting in money? Do you have a little more leeway than the mutual fund managers actually do? Could you talk a little bit about that?
So there are regulatory restrictions which are there in a mutual fund vis-a-vis what we have it in the PMS. Of course, the style of investing for the company as a whole remains the same. It
Mm-hmm.
is that value minus price, the margin of safety, which we have coined into a four-letter word called the QGLNP. The value piece being the QGNL and P is the price. Only thing is that in mutual funds, you can't actually go about buying more than 10% of a particular stock that you want. In a PMS style of investing, that restriction is not there. But even there, we have kept a restriction for ourselves that we will not allow any single stock in the portfolio to go beyond 20%, no matter what successes you have in that particular company. Just to name a few examples, a Page Industries would have become 55, 60 times my initial buying price, or let's say a Bajaj Finance, a similar 70 times, or for that matter, a Voltas, which is 8 or 9 times the initial buying price. But we have rebalanced the portfolio accordingly, and we don't want a single stock portfolio to contribute a whole lot to the returns of the. It's very, very balanced from that perspective. So passive breach, for us is a far more relaxed than in the case of, let's say, a mutual fund. And obviously, the initial allocation we have kept the same at around 10% maximum allocation in a stock, whether it be the mutual fund style of investing or the PMS style of investing. One another difference is that the PMS is actually far more transparent because the clients get to see their individual portfolios on a real-time basis. Whereas in the case of a mutual fund, you actually get to see a portfolio once a month, and that too on a fact sheet. You really don't know which stocks have gone in and out of that particular portfolio during the month. So the churn rates in mutual funds are higher than that of a PMS. As I said, that our churn rates have been just about 10 to 15%, which means one or two stocks actually go in and out. So the investor at the other end has a chance to evaluate what the fund manager is saying, whether he is following that in letter and spirit. Because if he sees a lot of churn and then we call ourselves as saying that we are a low churn company, that doesn't hold good. So I think PMS managers are far more long-term investors than what mutual fund investors are. Everybody talks long-term, but what is getting followed in your actual life portfolio gets demonstrated, and it's ample proof that PMS managers, if they have to be successful, have to really think long-term. And if you are having a style of a high churn, I can be rest assured, and you can be rest assured that you will not be able to beat the market. So a buy and hold approach, provided you buy the right stocks, a low churn, it will test your conviction, but it is a more transparent product. It comes out to be a better product than mutual funds, in my opinion.
You alluded to three stocks that have been, have given you many times returns over the years, Manish. So I just want to take off from that. The temptation of wanting to increase allocation to a stock when it's going up. At what point do you take that call that this stock is probably now fully priced or priced for growth that you can see out? And at what point do you decide to exit a particular holding after it's made you the kind of returns that you have? So just taking off from that previous question, it's a three-part question, but I think it's related to the previous answer you gave.
Yes, very true. So, in our style of investing, it is basically Q, G, L, and P, and where P comes the last. And what comes before is Q, which is quality. And quality of business we measure through free cash flow generation of that particular company, which means that if you put in 1 rupee of capital in that business should throw out more than 1 rupee of free cash. That is what we understand by quality of the business. Quality of the management, we want to have these companies run through by people who are integral in the entire history, and who always have a growth mindset, whether the economic conditions are actually favorable or not. Second is the growth aspect. We want our companies to double their profits in 3 to 4 years. And we firmly believe that, earnings and stock prices move in tandem. It's only a few months here or there. If you get your earnings right and the P multiples doesn't even expand or doesn't even contract, then your stock price will also double in the next 3 to 4 years. L is the longevity of growth, and this makes us stick around in the portfolio for the stocks that we have held for long periods of time. So longevity of growth, the terminal value, when you have a buy and hold style of investing, the competitive advantages determine the terminal value of that particular business. And markets on its part are generally erroneous about the length of the competitive advantage. Markets are both an art and a science. They precisely pinpoint the valuations for the next 2 years, but they have no clue about what this company's cash flows are going to be on a cumulative basis for the next 10 years. If you would have not had that situation, you would not have had an Asian Paints compound at 30% for 30 years. Every point in time, Asian Paints was an Asian Paints. It had a few chemicals mixed, you packed it in a box, put the logo of Asian Paints, and you sold. Cannot be a more simpler product than that. But if markets knew what Asian Paints cash flows are going to be for the next 10 years, you would have got that in the price the 10 years before that. But markets are generally wrong about the longevity of it. So the Page Industries that we bought, that longevity of growth was immense. Jockey as a company has been there in America for the last 140 years. Jockey was a premium product. It had a brand pull. They were able to take price increases. They were doubling capacity every 3 years. The market itself was growing at 12 to 15%, and they were positioned in the premium and the super premium segment of the market. India, being $1,000 per capita economy, always had that aspirational value attached to it, that if the per capita income moves from $1,000 to a $2,000, people will want to upgrade. This allowed the company to earn a profit CAGR of 35% for a period of 10 years. Obviously, it got listed at around half 500 crores or so when it got listed. But the way they grew, thanks to their pricing power, thanks to their brand pull, which are all competitive advantages, thanks to their distribution reach throughout the length and breadth of the country, ensured that the market always discounted only the next 2 or 3 years of profit and not the next 10 years of profit. Eventually, that company managed to grow at 35% for for the first 10 years. Thereafter, it grew at 18%. And so a 500 crore market cap company is today a 20,000 crore market cap company. At all points in time, you will always find Page as an expensive stock. But what eventually happens is that markets do not discount the next 2 years of earnings, but start discounting the next 5 years of earnings. So if the fifth year of earnings on a valuation basis you take, it was not expensive. But the only thing is that one must be correct about what the profit numbers are going to be like for the next 5 years, as opposed to what you can see for the next 2 years. I think this is the crux to the wealth creation journey in a buy and hold style of investing. You've got to be patient, and you've got to have the nuts and bolts of that company, what makes superior returns for those companies more than the cost of capital. The return on equity being 53%, and the company was growing at, let's say, 35%, and a payout ratio of 50% or thereabout, ensured that the business always remained extremely capital light. That is why you had such compounding. And even today, they are talking about production capacity doubling in the next 3 years. And they have the strength both on the online channel as well as in the offline channel, that they can do much better with this, as a category sells more on online. And even in the pandemic, they are gaining market share, and they have expanded the market category for themselves. First, they used to cater to just about the men's segment, then they went into the women's, kids wear, now athleisure, socks, towels, handkerchiefs. So they expanded the category for them. This is one stock which we have maintained in our portfolio over the last 13 years. I'll give you an example of a company which we actually enjoyed a lot of returns, but we have exited. And the case being point is Bajaj Finance. Bajaj Finance, when we had entered the stock, had a 10% gross NPA in their books. But things were changing. You had Nanu Pamnani, who came from GE Financial. You had Rajiv Jain, who actually came in from GE Financial. They had the experience of what had gone wrong in GE Financial, because it was the first consumer financing company that they went. They strategized, and then it was left for us to experience whether they actually execute what they are saying. They did what they said, and the credit appraisal process, etc., the fintech way of lending, the template-based way of lending, algo-driven way of lending, they have grown massively at a size of something like 1,50,000 crores. Now, what is happening is that this size, without a liability franchise for themselves, the public deposits, which is a sticky liability franchise, is just about 20% of the total loan book size. Now it has grown too big to be run as an NBFC, and they don't want to become a bank. And if they grow at 40-50%, and the loan book increases without you having a sticky liability franchise, you can always run into an asset liability mismatch, and then there could be chaos. So first of all, now the growth rates are going to come down. Secondly, credit costs are going to come down because the country has now gone through, let's say, two moratorium. The third round of moratorium is anywhere in the coming, either it's going to be one-time restructuring. They have entered into categories where there is no precedence of NPL cycles, like healthcare financing, like surgeries, but heart bypass surgeries. I mean, what precedence of NPL cycles do you have in this sort of category? So it has worked so far so good for themselves. But I think now the growth rates will come down, the credit costs are going to get elevated, they will have a challenge on the liability franchise. The markets are still valuing them at 5 times price to book. You have an HDFC bank which is trading at 2.5, 3 times price to book. Why not an HDFC bank, or why a Bajaj Finance? This is a point in time when this stock had become 18% of our portfolio. Its cost reduced to zero now.
That's very interesting to hear, Manish. So I think I take your point that price is probably the last thing that you have when you're evaluating a stock. So you are constantly evaluating the moat of the business as well and what's changing. Uh, you mentioned Page Industries as a case in point, which started off as a men and women innerwear brand and then expanded the category. Uh, so do you try and look for competitors also that are coming up in that same field? Or if someone today asked you what is the next Page Industries, you will probably say Page Industries itself is the next Page Industries.
So Michael Porter's five forces model are constantly being evaluated. Any of the five forces does undergo a change, it raises a red flag.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of Page Industries, we had a red flag in one of the competitors, which is basically Van Heusen, come to the forefront in a big way. But their channel checks, what we got to understand is that they were pushing inventory, giving massive commission to your agents or your dealers to sell through their products. Plus, the size of the turnover was just about 300 crores, whereas Page Industries was a 3,000 crore turnover. So, brand by itself. The products were also probably much better than Page. But first of all, the distribution touch points. How do you make available your product throughout the nook and corner of the country? And how can you profit from the sales that you are doing? Of course, they had just launched it and they were prepared to burn a lot of cash. But the balance sheet of the company itself was in dire straits. So we really came to the conclusion, yes, they will actually hit Page Industries for 1 or 2 years, but the way they are bleeding in terms of their innerwear business, it won't be long before they have to actually curtail down their business significantly or maybe even shut down. That exactly has played out. I mean, even today, if you take the likes of, let's say, a Lux or a Rupa, they are maybe half the size of, let's say, a Page Industries. But look at the margin difference that you have between Page and Lux or Rupa. It's 10 or 12% for them vis-a-vis 18, 19% for, let's say, Page Industries. The entire optimization of the value chain that happens in Page Industries is nowhere close to what the competition can do. Right from procurement of raw material, conversion of that into yarn, into the stitching, making the apparel, and at the same time then packing into boxes and making it available. These guys are more of a local presence. They get a lot of work outsourced from outsiders. The value destruction across the value chain is very significant when you get things done outside rather than when you get things done inside. That creates the superior margin of safety in terms of margin difference between competition. So you're right, for today in the apparel business, and today Page is a total apparel company as opposed to just an innovator. They are producing boxers and athleisure, loungewear, etc. I mean, there is no competition. It's still the largest player, and they still have the next 5, 10 years in which they can grow significantly, even from these.
So Manish, before I ask my next question, actually, one of the participants has just written in that your volume is a little soft. Is it possible to just raise your volume a little bit or get a little closer to the computer, maybe?
Is it better now?
Yeah, I think that's a lot better. So
Yeah.
I think Manish, you mentioned HDFC Bank, and I had the good fortune of speaking to Mr. Vallabh Bansali on this platform a couple of weeks back, and he said it's a very non-sexy business. Very unassuming people who are doing the work, but they just go about doing the work. Uh, and I actually I'd say about 5 years back, I was with a fund manager in Hong Kong, and he told me the same thing I asked you about Page Industries, where he said HDFC Bank is the next HDFC Bank. When I asked him if there was one banking stock that you'd buy, what is it about this company that fascinates investors over the years? Despite being such a huge wealth compounder, it manages to grow its business. It is not like there is some massive product differentiation that HDFC Bank is doing, or even a Kotak Mahindra Bank for that matter, compared to, say, what the peers are doing. So, what sets these franchises apart? Is it how they look at the liability side, as you were saying in the case of Bajaj Finance, or is there just something more to it?
It's a whole lot of things, Rahul. So, in the case of, let's say, an HDFC Bank or Kotak Mahindra Bank, first is the DNA of the founding members of that bank. In a lending and borrowing business like that of a bank or an NBFC, you can grow too fast. It's not about giving the money, it is about getting your money back. That differentiates between whether an organization is going to continue too far or whether it's going to fall off a cliff after some time of huge growth. Because we have known that HDFC previously, when it was a smaller organization, used to grow at 30%. Then it used to grow at 20%. Now it's more like 15%. So if they want, they can grow at 30% even today. They are ample takers of credit from them. But the fact that in the field of banking, it is about credit appraisal, how you evaluate your client's credit profile, and whether the collection machinery is robust enough to ensure that you can grow and not have non-performing loans.
Hmm.
So it's very easy to give money, but it is very difficult to collect back the money. So first of all, establish systems and processes which are foolproof, and you have gone through the experience and the learning cycle to develop these systems and processes. Ensure that the culture within the organization is that there are no questions asked or no breach of these systems and processes in whatsoever. No matter who you are, you have got to follow those processes. Have a very strong credit appraisal team, have a very strong collections team. At the same time, if you have a very strong liability franchise and you can leverage on technology, nothing like it. There are certain types of businesses which can only take a certain set of capital amount. Like if you talk about, let's say, a Page Industries, and Page Industries just can't absorb a lot of capital. And the ROEs can shoot up to, let's say, 50-60%. In the case of banking, it's a 15-16% ROE business. But you can put in tons of capital into a banking type of a business. Even if that business can actually earn you only 15-16%, the amount that can be invested into an HDFC bank or a Kotak bank is immense. So the pool of opportunity to make money in a single stock, if you were to evaluate that aspect is not there with Page Industries. The price impact would be significant. But the fact is that the raw material and the end product in a banking company is capital only. You can put in tons and tons of capital of your invested capital into a HDFC bank and still allow the compounding machine to run. So the absolute amount of capital gains that you can generate in an HDFC bank or Kotak bank is far higher than the amount of capital gains that you can actually generate in a Page Industry. Just because this business can consume large amounts of capital, where there are certain businesses which just can't consume a large amount of capital.
Just laboring on that point, Manish, and I'm sorry this is starting to sound like a case study on HDFC Bank, but you sort of mentioned the importance of management in one of your earlier comments as well. And you also spoke about Rajiv Jain coming in into Bajaj Finance along with some other professionals. There are three management changes that have happened in the last 5 years in the consumer side in India. All three stocks that we actually track, and the shareholders have made a lot of money in these names: Britannia, Jubilant FoodWorks, and Bata. Now, HDFC Bank is at the cusp of a change in management. For Is the bank now on autopilot, or does it matter as to who's running a franchise like that? When you have a stock that is such a large part of your portfolio, should that be something that is top of the mind?
Absolutely. If you associate HDFC Bank's success, it has to be Mr. Aditya. Now that he is going to relinquish his post and there's somebody who is going to come and replace him, it would be much better if they choose somebody from within the organization. If they choose somebody who is outside the organization, there will be a change in the culture, and you can see repercussions on that account going forward. So I'd be wary of HDFC Bank between now and October, because once a management changes, there are a lot of skeletons that comes out of the cupboard, and particularly in the case of banking. Mr. Puri has executed it to the hilt, to the finest possible execution that one can have. But after Mr. Puri, whoever takes charge of HDFC Bank, the valuation multiples for HDFC Bank will undergo a change either on the upside or on the downside. I'd be more than happy if they choose somebody from within the bank rather than look outside. And if that happens, there's at least some sense of continuity of the DNA which has brought HDFC Bank to where it is today. Some similarity in culture which can help it to grow further, and at the same time not see a massive compression in valuation.
It's interesting you mentioned that the change of guard at the top could actually even result in a reset of valuations on the way up. I'm assuming that the stature of the person replacing Mr. Puri will have to be very similar or higher for that to happen. But that being said, Manish, I just want to take you back to the original point you started making about Page Industries and apply it to, say, some other companies. And one of the companies you do own in your portfolio, which is a footwear company, and I'm sure you've analyzed, a lot of other consumer businesses. One of the listed QSR plays in India, which is into burgers. Does it surprise you that given the scale of opportunity, these guys are still not at $1 billion of turnover? Because the same thing that you said for Page Industries in terms of, longevity of the business, runway to growth would pretty much apply to all of these businesses. And these are not high ticket consumption. I mean, it's fairly, it's fairly bottom to mid of the pyramid. So has it surprised you that these franchises have not grown into $1 billion plus franchises over the years, despite being present in India for as long as they have?
Absolutely. Like in the case of Bata, I mean, it's a 85-year-old company in India, and I mean, footwear is the basic necessity of every Indian. From that aspect, I would say that all this while till Mr. Sanjay Kataria joined this company, they have not really executed what they should have done. So the way of thinking of the top management has to undergo a change before a stock actually changes for better valuation. Like, I mean, in the case of previous, erstwhile Bata, the same number of stores you are having. You're not experimenting and opening newer stores. You're not reaching out to tier 2, 3 town, 4 towns and cities. Your product remains the same. There's no innovation, no change. It's a high fashion item. You don't have a new offering that comes every Friday, which a lot of the other competitors like Metro Shoes. I mean, Metro Shoes and Bata are in a similar basket, but look where Metro is and look where Bata is. So now things are changing for the better. I think out here, you'll have to have a new and a more innovative product design and innovation space. You'll have to do less of in-house manufacturing and go more with outsourcing of manufacturing, because you are playing on a brand that will keep your asset life you penetrate deeper into the tier 3, 4 towns and cities within the total basket. You create a niche for yourself. I remember in the case of Bata, it's just about the hush puppies that everybody has, the first recall on the mind. This is one of the products which is one of the best in the case of Bata. Why can't we have a whole lot of other brand recalls when it comes to footwear in the minds of the consumer? So they have to make themselves visible. They have to, because in the stock market, what you see is what gets sold. So make your presence felt. Of course, they have had a lot of hiccups along the way where they opened large format stores and then they had to downsize it. Plus the pilferage that used to happen in Bata previously. Now SAP has got introduced. You'll have a better just-in-time stock inventory available in the system. So these are the reasons why Bata is undergoing a change. Again, size of the opportunity is huge. They have wasted a whole lot of years where, they have been one of the oldest footwear companies in the country, and yet they have not been able to capitalize on the branding and the positioning of that international brand onto India. In the case of Jubilant Foodworks, they have executed somewhat much better. And of course, that has also come after Mr. Porter joined the company, the everyday value concept, where you don't have to wait for every Wednesday to get a deal. And you improve the quality and made it more affordable. That is doing wonders. I mean, in the case of consumption, India's consumption story is going to be valid for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. In whatever category you are in, if you can afford value and at an affordable price, it is going to sell. You just got to do the same things day in and day out without making too many mistakes. That's the long and short of entire consumer story.
Do you think these businesses still have a moat, Manish, when you talk about footwear or the QSR players, or do you think that there is competition catching up? Do you think that the competitive advantage that some of those case studies that you alluded to earlier in this conversation probably doesn't exist to that extent in these businesses? The environment is changing rather rapidly for some of these consumer-facing businesses, or is that an incorrect assumption?
No, but there is a very large unorganized market. And slowly and steadily, the country is moving from an unorganized space to an organized space. Whether it be the vada pav, which can give way to burgers or pizzas, or whether it be, let's say, your Bata giving way to an XYZ coming out of China. And now that Prime Minister Modi has also said Atmanirbhar. I mean, the chance could not have been much better for these branded companies to capitalize on economies of scale, make your products available at the price points at which consumers are willing to pay. You will have value created not only for the consumers but as well as for the shareholders of the company. There's immense value. I mean, I really don't think competition is any good or was any less even in the past. Just got to evolve with the times, think with an innovative mindset, and the solution is there. And it's all about execution of these plans day in and day out.
If I'm not mistaken, Manish, you did write a paper for the World Economic Forum on the consumption patterns of India, or co-authored at least, if I'm not mistaken. And if I was to marry that with a comment that you had made in one of your interviews a few years back, you said if you were marooned in your shorts somewhere on an island and you still had to pick three stocks, you would pick HDFC Bank, Page Industries, and the third one is one of my favorites, which is Hindustan Unilever. So since this has become a case study sort of conversation, I want to get your thoughts on how you would approach a business like Hindustan Unilever. It's one of the first stocks I had recommended when we started the institutional business here to a lot of fund managers. It's probably been a multi bagger from that point in 2011, and obviously came out of a 10-year cycle of going nowhere, moving in just about a 1,500 rupee range. But given where the valuations of a Hindustan Unilever are today, and I started my career as a consumer analyst, and I've seen lever re-rate all the way from 35 to 60 times. People keep asking at what price is enough to pay for a Hindustan Unilever, because this is not a company growing its top line at 20%, over the last 5 years, it's been more a margin expansion story rather than a top line story. Obviously the other income in these companies are very cash rich, so the profitability growth has come through, but it's not come through at a runaway top line story like you mentioned in the case of HDFC Bank, which can pretty much decide at what rate it wants to grow at, or the Page Industries in terms of runway to grow. Given the distribution of a Hindustan Unilever, the fact that digital is now a genuine advantage to a lot of smaller players also, how do you approach this? If you were sort of doing a case study on HUL and telling people that this is a company that you should buy, uh, how does one assess HUL as it stands today?
Management trainees have an aspiration to work for HUL, to get an insight into what HUL's mindset and the way of thinking is.
Can I pause you there? Can I pause you there for just a second? And I'm quite intrigued that you said that. Just allow me to go out of the frame for a second. And this is actually the book I'm reading right now. So the CEO Factory.
Yeah.
So since you mentioned management trainee, I thought I'd bring that in. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So in the case of HUL, it is about innovation, the winning in many India, WIMI. They say winning in many Indias. India is not one country. It is a mix of 23, 24 states which are in themselves countries. So they evolve and they actually create products suiting the community needs around that region. And they tend to premiumize products because obviously aspirational values go up. So gone are the days of clinic. Now people aspire for Tresemme. Why? It's the same thing, right? It's a shampoo. So Tresemme is a more premium product than clinic. Gone are the days of a Lifebuoy. We are actually now wanting to have Dove as a soap. So the product remains the same. The premiumization story ensures that they earn far superior margins than what they have been doing. Introduction into many more new categories, personal care, home care, oral care, these are their flagship categories which they have. Now they have acquired Horlicks, which is a full-fledged entry into the food segment. And they can do wonders with Horlicks, which the entrenched brand name brings for themselves. The ready-to-drink segment, the biscuits, the noodles, which the erstwhile Horlicks already had for themselves. So the things which work for Hindustan Unilever, first of all, 10 million outlets is where the touch point is. 10 million. There is not a single company in India which reaches that sort of touch point. And they have not even scratched the surface for tier 3, 4, 5, and 6 towns and cities. So runaway for penetration still exists massively for them. And if there is one company which can do it, it is actually HUL to begin with. Second, the entire value chain or the supply chain or the cost optimization that they have done to leverage of technology is unparalleled. Not a single company in India has had that cost competitiveness, what they have been able to do on such a massive scale. Third is the premiumization story. Fourth, you have a very capital asset light balance sheet. They reward their shareholders by paying out 35, 40, 50%. They hardly require capital. Plus, a plethora of products from their parent company are not yet introduced into India. Mm-hmm. That advantage remains as we move up the per capita chain. Even surpassing, let's say, a Tata Consumer Beverages. Their market share is 26%, whereas Tata Tea is only about 24%. Imagine what they can do if they bring a Tata Sampann style of business onto their own platform. The branded Atas like Ashirwad, they already have Pillsbury, but the spices, etc. And these are very high margin businesses. So I think it's a product which can go beyond the current categories that they have. They can premiumize in all the categories they are personally present. They can have a greater cost optimization leverage to technology that can ensure that premium margins can allow them to earn even at 6, 7, 8% volume growth throughout the country. If the GDP growth is around those numbers, they can easily clock a 20% sort of And I am of the firm belief that Hindustan Unilever by FY22, and assuming that they will have a net profit number of 10,000 crores. 10,000 crores, a 50 P multiple will give them a 5 lakh crore market cap. It's on its way to achieve that. And after that, we'll see how the company progresses with what more new innovations that they have on the table. They don't disclose their cards all that well ahead of time also. That's also
That's a fascinating thought on the company. Manish, how do you unwind beyond work? I mean, we've all been locked into our houses for the last 3-4 months, but pre-lockdown and during lockdown, how do you unwind beyond work? Obviously, the work hours have gone up for people in our profession, both on the buy side and the sell side. But beyond work, pre-COVID, how were you unwinding? During COVID, how were you unwinding?
So, uh, uh, when we used to go to office every day, I just used to yearn for 1 month of staying in home and just relaxing, doing nothing. We were so overworked. Now in this 3.5, 4 months, I've got so tired of staying at home that I want to go to the office now. I'm sick and tired. So I think apart from work, obviously we are working more now through Zoom calls
Right.
and a plethora of calls that we have from 9 o'clock in the morning to 8 in the evening. Apart from that, it is all about reading books, staying with the family, having good food, all cooked inside, doing some cooking, doing some light exercises here and there, playing a lot of indoor games, all of that, walking in the park. I mean, that's all that you can do about in the lockdown. But time is good. We are enjoying, whether it be work or outside work.
That's awesome. What are you reading right now, Manish?
Yeah, so there is a book called I just finished this book. I forget the name. I'll get back to you on this. I just forgot the name of that book. But it's a fascinating book. The CEO's Factory was the one which I read just before this.
Okay.
But yeah, just before this, and we began a new book. It's a very thick book. It's called Insights into Something. Insights into Something.
That's okay. You can message it to me offline. When I
Yeah,
post this
I'll
video
WhatsApp.
online, I'll definitely attach the name of that book with it.
WhatsApp it to you. Yeah.
It's been fascinating chatting, Manish, about your style of investing. It was almost a teach-in on the kind of case studies of your fairly concentrated investments, how your thought process works, and how you've gone about the business of managing the PMS over the years. It's been a huge learning experience for me to listen into you as well, and I hope you enjoyed being on. It was probably not talking
Yes.
to you, not talking to you as your broker, but as an anchor, so to speak. But it's been fascinating. I mean, it's been very insightful, and I hope you enjoyed being on.
Yeah, absolutely. It was my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me out.
Awesome. So stay safe, Manish. Hopefully, I'll see you soon in person when we
Thank
put
you.
this behind us. And once again, thank you so much for your time, and for all the participants who've joined in as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rahul. Thanks,
Stay safe.
everybody.
Thank you.
Stay